Welcome to the Fully Alive by Disciples Made Studios. I am Jason Phelps, your host and Fully Alive coach, and I'm thrilled to guide this conversation about living fully alive by igniting your impact through optimizing your God-given personal calling. Our purpose today is to explore how understanding and optimizing your personal calling can transform your life and the lives of those around you. Personal calling is the unique purpose God has designed for each of us, a mission that aligns with our gifts, passions, and story. It's not just about what we do, but who we are meant to be. Discovering and living out our personal calling allows us to partner with Jesus in bringing God's kingdom to earth, making our lives not only meaningful, but also impactful. Today, we are joined by three others from the Fully Alive by Disciples Made team, Brian, Myra, and Craig, who will share their insights and experiences to help us all find our place and fulfill our masterpiece mission. Welcome, you guys. So good to be with you. I would love for you to briefly introduce yourself along with your role with Fully Alive and where you call home. Myra, let's start with you, and then we'll go to Craig and then Brian.
Hi, I am Myra Schrader. I call Overland Park, Kansas, my home. And my role at Disciples Made, Fully Alive, is I am a coach. I am the women's catalyst. So focus on bringing women into that multiplication area where they can multiply disciples.
And I am Craig Watson. I am in the North Texas area in the DFW Metroplex, and my role in Disciples Made is as the men's catalyst, so the complement to Myra on the men's side and a coach.
And I'm Brian. Brian Phelps got the privilege of founding Disciples Made that hosts this Fully Alive community. Started back in 2010 when God said, "You're not multiplying disciples." And I said, well, I don't know how to do that apparently. And a lot of this is just rolled out in obedient steps since then. And my current role is I'm the board chair and the CEO of the Disciples Made ministry. Those are the titles, but what I like to call myself is the visionary who protects the culture, the DNA, the training and all that, and just helps release people into their masterpiece mission, whether it's Craig or Myra or Jason or anybody else involved in volunteering. My job really is to help people thrive as they live out their masterpiece mission as it serves this team. So a very pertinent role I play to this conversation in the ministry as a whole.
Love it. Well, so thankful to be able to spend this early afternoon with you guys, as well as everybody who is chiming in on Riverside or on Facebook. We hope today that it's really helpful. We unpack this kingdom impact and how catalyzing and optimizing our personal calling really kind of plays into that in this character times calling equals impact way of life. And so we're going to be going through, as you guys know, all throughout the month of September, kind of focusing on personal calling, this thing we also call masterpiece mission. And so our hope today is for everybody who is listening to be able to get clarity, to be able to take their right next steps as they develop and optimize their personal calling. So I want to start off today just with a baseline of helping people understand what personal calling actually is. And so first question this morning is, what does personal calling mean to each of you? Okay, what does personal calling mean to each of you, and how do you define it in your own life?
Begging somebody to go first? I vote
Let's
Myra.
Let's do it, Myra. Would love to hear from you.
I define personal calling as living out my identity, the God-given identity that He's had for me since the beginning of time when He first knew I was going to be. I think of it in terms, when I think about personal calling, I think about where am I most joyful in using my gifts? Where am I actually bearing fruit? I can recall when I first, I think, stepped into that personal calling. I remember saying to a pastor friend of mine that this is just something I can't not do. It is so good and so right that it just, it's a must do. I would do it no matter what, because that's what I know that this was what I was made to do.
I love that. It kind of reminds me of, that when we step into our personal calling, I think I got this from our Find Your Place course, is that personal calling is both fruitful and fulfilling, right? And I hear that just in your story.
Yes,
Yep.
for sure.
Brian, what about you?
When I hear those, I hear everything that Myra said, that idea of personal calling, but I just want to unpack those two words. It's personal. It's very unique to me. We all are called to participate in the Great Commission, which that's a corporate, that's an us, not a me. But there's a unique masterpiece mission, which kind of is the term you also shared, but it's personal. It's God uniquely crafted this for me in the story that he wrote my life to be. And it's a calling. And the calling part to me is just like, I called my daughter this morning to check on her. God has called me. It's vocal. The word there is a vocal action, that God made a personal vocal invitation to me to join him in helping making earth more like heaven. And so that's what that means to me from just a very high level sense. The more technical sense for me is more along the lines of what we use for our masterpiece mission. What are my top 2 or 3 spiritual gifts that continue to show up, not just in tests and surveys and assessments and things like that, but also what do I notice God is using the most to make the biggest difference in people's lives, and how am I using those to make the earth more like heaven in a way that ignites my passion? Like Myra said, like I can't not do this no matter the circumstance.
I love that. I don't know if many people actually kind of think of personal calling in the sense of just actually like a vocal a vocal calling that Jesus is calling, and he's calling us this direction, or calling us into into this ministry, or to make this particular part of earth. I think we kind of think of it just as almost like a goal or something like that, and I really like that. Craig, what about you? How do you define personal calling? What does that mean to you, and how does it define your life?
Well, like Brian and Myra said, God uniquely created me, and Jesus uniquely redeemed me to do certain stuff that I was specifically built to do. And there's nobody else in this world who was built and made and redeemed to do the stuff that God has planned for me. And that's an incredible challenge. It's an incredible understanding. Myra, like you said, our identity is all wrapped up into that. And when we're doing the stuff that we were created to do, how can that not be exciting? How can that not be challenging? How can that not be like just this fulfilling thing? And I know that I was created at this time and put in this place among these people that do particular stuff. And that stuff is my calling. And so that's my stab at it.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Ephesians 2:10 talks, says that for we are God's masterpiece, created anew to do good works that he planned for us long ago. And, when I kind of parse out that scripture right there, is there's kind of like, there's an identity statement and an impact statement in that. There's like that we are God's masterpiece. We are his prized creation, his prized possession, that we were made in his image. And from that, we do these good works that God planned for us long ago before we were even made. And so I love that particular verse that Paul writes to the church in Ephesus that, that really kind of frames, you've heard us talk about this, for those listening, this term masterpiece mission. And if you've been through the course, Find Your Place, you're familiar with that. Or if you've read Brian and Rob Wegner's book, Find Your Place, you're familiar with masterpiece mission. And so Ephesians 2:10, I think, really kind of clings on to that idea that we are God's prized possession and creation, and that we also have incredible good works to do to make this world more like heaven as we partner with Jesus. And so I don't think necessarily, though, that every believer, every follower of Jesus has had the opportunity to clarify or develop their personal calling. They may not know they have a personal calling. They may not know that they have a unique design. Craig, I'd love to hear from you. Like, why do you believe that it's important for every believer, every disciple maker to understand, to clarify, and develop their personal calling?
Well, the way I look at it, and I love analogies, right? So, but the way I look at it is that we are tools in God's toolbox as Jesus goes about creating His kingdom here on earth, right? And tools are most useful when they're being used for the purposes for which they were created, right? I mean, a hammer does best hammering. A screwdriver does best, putting in screws and taking them out, right? And although a screw and a hammer, a screw and a nail look similar, they're very different things. And, and a hammer trying to put in a screw just isn't very effective, right? And so when we understand ourselves as the means by which God impacts the world, and that there is a uniqueness to us and to that calling, to that purpose. And then it gives us, it helps write our understanding of who we are. It helps write our understanding of our relationship to Jesus and to His kingdom. And it helps write our understanding in how He intends to use us to go about His work. So
I don't know if you guys are guilty of this too, but sometimes I can't find my hammer, and I'll end up trying to use a screwdriver or something.
Of a screwdriver,
right?
Hey, you hurt your finger. Yeah,
exactly. No, that's exactly what I was thinking of. Oh, that's great. One of the, I love how just like, also in Scripture, is that, Paul tells us that, we're a body of Christ, that all of us have a different role, different function, different purpose. And it's something, because we both, the tools, we need hammers, we need screwdrivers, we need, and the list goes on, right? And so just, I think when also like we have permission to kind of, I don't necessarily want to say stay in our lane, but when we know what our personal calling is, it allows us to stay focused. I think we touched upon that last month too when we were talking about developing your character. And I know we shared a bit on it on social media too, that when you know your personal calling, it allows you to like, you don't feel the need to like step into like a lot of drama sometimes, or because you're so focused on like, hey, this is my purpose, so I don't need to mess with that over here. Permission to not be distracted. And I think that's also part of this whole Live Fully Alive, that we can really leverage the influence that Jesus has given us when we have clarity with our unique design. We know the lane in which we were built to live in and thrive in and to do what we do best. And that, that reminds me, Brian, kind of what you were saying of like our top 2 to 3 spiritual gifts. And I love how, that Jesus knew what He was doing that He aligned our personal calling with the gifts that He has given us. Brian, I'd love to hear just for you. I mean, you've been, making and multiplying disciples for decades. And why would you say it's important for every believer to understand and develop their personal calling and masterpiece mission?
Well, I think there's 2 reasons. One is, and you started to allude to this, but we need a reason to get up and engage life every morning. There needs to be a North Star in our life, something that we are helping the creator of the universe redeemed the world back to its mint condition. And if we don't have that appropriate thing to focus on that gives us energy and gives us a reason to live, we tend to get all that energy directed in a location or in a direction that's unhelpful. I think what we say in the book is your energies are going to go somewhere. They're going to either go to something productive that's great for the common good, or they're going to go to creating, like you said, drama and other places. Like I joined the board of a homeowners association in my neighborhood because things kind of got crazy, and they're crazy again. But it's just like, I just scratch my head going, how can these people dedicate so much energy to creating conflict and drama in the neighborhood? It's like, because they're preoccupied by things that don't matter, and they're preoccupied by things that don't matter because they haven't locked onto the things that do. I do think we're going to find ourselves absolutely committed to something. And if God is providing us a top shelf trophy to grab onto called this vision of a personal calling, and to me, it's just one of the greatest gifts he can give us.
Can you, just to kind of bring it down to a very practical level, when you joined the HOA, what did it look like for you to utilize your top 2 to 3 spiritual gifts in that endeavor?
My top 2 or 3 gifts would be wisdom, encouragement, and leadership. Those are the ones that keep popping up most of the time. And so wisdom, and how can I share with this board how we can actually approach some of these big community problems in a way that's not, just combative. How can we, approach this to get more buy-in? So just basically leveraging wisdom for how to move forward with particular challenges that faced our association. Encouragement, how can I personally try to build up every person on the board? Because, encouraged people tend to encourage people. And right now, all the board was getting was negative from each other and the rest of the neighborhood. And then leadership was, okay, we need to go this way and do everything I can to help get people on board. So yeah, and the reason I was called to do it is because in my Bible reading and journaling, I keep hitting these Prince of Peace type of things, and you're to be the peacekeeper. And, and I kept seeing all this chaos. And so I just felt through the I believe and I will that I'm supposed to be, a person who, under Jesus' peaceful leadership, provides peace in the context where I live. And this is where I live. And so that's why I did it, and that's how I used that. Thanks for that question.
Yeah.
That was fun to answer.
No, because I think it's great that I think sometimes, when people maybe think of personal calling, it's limited to like a specific vocation. And it can be, absolutely. But I think there's like everything, there's either like a macro or a micro view of it. And within that kind of that macro sense is, for you having wisdom, encouragement, and leadership as your top 2 to 3 gifts, combining that with paying attention and listening and following the Holy Spirit led you into an environment where you can step into your personal calling, which is, in a sense, right, is like wherever you go, is that you bring wisdom, leadership, and encouragement, right. I mean, Myra, does any of that kind of like, how does Brian's story, anything resonate with you?
Yeah, very much. And one of the things that I love the most is that personal calling is not specific. It's not compartmentalized in your life. So my top spiritual gifts are knowledge and teaching. And I find that I can use that with different people that I'm around at different times, and there's a need for it in different ways. I've used it with family members. I've used it with obviously with my groups at church and so forth. But it goes with me wherever I go, and I find the most joy when I'm able to do that. It brings me joy to help other people when I can use those gifts for those things. So the portability of it, I guess. The other thing about it that I heard Craig, I think, initially talk about being created for this place and this time. And I think that's the other thing that just really resonates with me when I think about that masterpiece mission is this place and this time. And Brian said it too. This is where I live. And so I felt a strong calling when we moved to where we lived 10 years ago, that this is where God wanted me to be. I'm still trying to figure out what exactly he wanted me to do that. I did the HOA thing, and that was great. But I also met some people whose gifts complemented my own, and was able to challenge and teach them some things. I think it's an ongoing thing, but I do feel like it's for this time and this place. That I've been given these gifts and I need to use them wherever I am and not limit it to say, oh, well, that's what I do at church.
Right. What I'm hearing is just this talk of capacity, that when we are living in our personal calling and living out this masterpiece mission, that it seems that our capacity to make an influence in this world, to add value to this world, tends to skyrocket, because in a sense, right, we find this, I don't know, you could say it's like a sweet spot of life. And the two words that I used earlier were, a fulfilling life and a fruitful life, right? And so, I mean, stories, I'm sure you guys have some. Craig, I would love to hear a story of just like any sort of, personal experience or story where understanding your personal calling and masterpiece mission has led to significant impact or transformation over in North Texas.
Hey, real quick before Craig jumps in, I'd love to twist a little piece in here, because you brought up something I think extremely helpful, but I also want to come back and put a little bow on it before Craig goes to telling an awesome story. When we talk about masterpiece mission, I would be stretched to say that joining the HOA was a grand part of my masterpiece mission, right? So it was actually much more of a distraction than it was an alignment with my masterpiece mission, because it's not just what I can do, the top gifts, which we listed, and you asked a great question about how do you use those specifically for that. But it's like, I want to use those gifts most productively with the biggest passion he's given me. And the biggest passion is to help mobilize 70,000 followers of Jesus to, share the gospel and live out the gospel and bless 2 million of their friends, to help them live more fully alive with Jesus. Like, that's the center of the bullseye. That's what gets me up every day. So that to me is the masterpiece mission. That's the sandbox in which I want to use my gifts. But that really is a result of obedience, and the HOA was also a part of just an obedience step. But I just think it's important, like when you talk about masterpiece mission as a whole, to realize, yes, there is probably, and I would think it would be extremely advantageous to have a North Star like that you're committed to, but also being willing to have the margin or capacity, as you said, to take obedience steps when those are brought up, like that HOA thing. And there was an end to that for me. And so anyway, I just wanted to toss that in before that got lost, because I was about to follow Craig, and Craig, just his stories are so good. I knew I'd lose it. So
right, yeah, you just wanted to make sure that nobody thought that HOA was your masterpiece mission. So.
I think anybody that knows me is pretty clear. I think anybody alive. Those are tough.
Right.
Can I insert something too that
please.
kind of goes with what we were talking about earlier in terms of capacity and the uniqueness of it, and the right tool for the right thing. I had to, many years ago, I had to resign my membership to the Can't Say No Club. People were asking me, oh, she can do it.
Yes.
Oh, she'll do it. Oh, yeah. And I was just, falling for all of it. And when you talked about the importance of knowing your masterpiece mission lets you avoid some of the drama, that is exactly true. But it also leaves space for other people to live out their masterpiece mission.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
that,
absolutely.
I had a very wise pastor who said, Myra, if you keep saying yes to everything, nobody else has a chance to step forward. And so
Ooh.
I just, wise words, and I've lived by them ever since.
Make sure that gets on social
Right.
media. That's gold. That's gold. What's the finger right here, right here, right here? That was gold.
So Craig, we're gonna keep pausing on you really quick, man.
I'm just gonna start talking again, so Craig never has a chance to talk.
Hold on to that story. I want to hear it.
Right, exactly, because I got an email from Craig earlier, right, saying that we would have to try our best to contain him because he had so much good stuff to share. So so we're just doing our best to honor your wishes, Craig. So for me also, as someone who's I guess I could say a recovering people pleaser, and all that kind of stuff, what I have found is that knowing your top 2 to 3 spiritual gifts, knowing the people you're passionate about, knowing the causes you're passionate about, your influencing style, all in this beautiful narrative that's being written, is that those operate as a predetermined, God-given filter for what we say yes to and no to. Right. And I think that's along the lines of what you're saying, Myra. So someone who can, really resonate with what you're saying, because whenever you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. So I've kind of like tricked my brain into like, I want my kids' approval. And so I don't know if this is the best way to say it, but it's like I can kind of do this reversal on whose approval I'm caring about. Now, ultimately, I want it to be obviously, to please God and everything like that. But, these spiritual gifts and all these kind of things operate as a filter. And so if we're being asked to do something that has nothing to do with our masterpiece mission or personal callings or giftedness or passions, let's let somebody else get in the game, because they're going to find that it's not only fruitful, but it's going to be more fulfilling. And whoever is asking you, to fulfill whatever role it is, to volunteer or whatever, they're going to be happier with the results of finding that other person too. And that's the beauty of us, this being a team sport, right? And this partnership with Jesus and his mission.
Craig has to have a story now.
He does. And we muted him, or he muted himself once again, because,
I don't think I did that myself. However, so, I think part of it is certainly there are tools, and then we're going to talk about GPS, but part of it is just a discovery process, and I knew whenever I became a believer that Jesus had stuff for me to do. I just kind of felt that intuitively, that part of the reason why, he saved me was to do good stuff around me, right? To make this world a little better. And so I can remember one of the first times that I served, and I had a week off, and it was during VBS week at the church, that I go to, and I was a pretty new believer, and I stood on a corner on the curb of the sidewalk for a week, making sure that kids got across the street safely, right? And I did that. I manned my post like a champ. I never, and I don't know that I got a whole lot out of it other than a sunburn, but I was there doing good stuff for God, and kind of like, you can use a hammer for a paperweight, right? You can put it. That's going to keep the wind from blowing paperweight, but that's not its best use. And so part of this thing is doing stuff sometimes just because it is available and it is an option, and that there's something you should be doing, and then I don't have anything else better to do at the moment, so I'm going to try this. And so you can get these kind of inklings of what it is you've been created for, but when you just start going out and doing stuff, sometimes God reveals things to you, and sometimes it's good, and sometimes it's he's like, nope, that's not for you. And so I appreciated that. It's a story that I tell a lot to guys when I'm just, hey, you don't have to wait on finding out exactly what it is that your masterpiece mission is. Get busy about doing God stuff, and he's going to reveal part of that to you as you go along.
Well, I love that. And that goes kind of right into getting practical because we want to help people today be able to take a next step. And so, for those of you who are listening, you've heard us talk about Masterpiece Mission and Find Your Place. And so you can actually take a free assessment. It might take you about a half an hour to do, and just depending on your personality, but you can go to giftpassionstory.com, giftpassionstory.com, sign up, take the free GPS assessment, and it will help. It'll give you your top 2 to 3 spiritual gifts. And what I love about this is that it doesn't overwhelm you like other resources do. Some resources give you your dominant spiritual gifts. They give you your secondary, your tertiary, your auxiliary, all the other, levels of it. And it can be absolutely overwhelming. And so one of the things that I know, for us at Fully Alive and Disciples Made is that I think it's healthy. Just focus on those top 2 to 3 spiritual gifts. What are the causes you're passionate about? The people group you're passionate about, and an influencing style, which we find in Ephesians 4, sometimes called APEST or the fivefold ministry, and then also you have the opportunity to be able to kind of sift through your story and just kind of see how God has, maybe you've unknowingly used your spiritual gifts in the past and everything. So we invite you guys to take that right next step of just that GPS assessment for free at giftpassionstory.com. What kind of, Craig, what I'm hearing from you too, I don't know if you guys have been in churches like this, but I think sometimes is that what you had mentioned, Craig, is that sometimes you can use a hammer as a paperweight, right? And that I think that, what I love is on the Fully Alive website at gofullyalive.com, there's a phrase up there, and it says this. It says, "You were designed for more." And I think sometimes you have somebody who is designed to be a hammer who's simply just serving in a capacity as a paperweight. And so I don't know if you guys have seen or have any stories of serving in a church context where you've seen somebody, maybe they're, a high-powered CEO, or maybe they're, entrepreneurial, or they're an intensely creative person that maybe has never done anything more than, printing off supplies for a Bible study leader for Sunday mornings. I don't know. Have you guys seen you guys have any stories about people who were designed for more but never got to experience that within a church setting?
I tip my hat to Craig to start, since we stole his story time earlier.
Well, I think we have a tendency to do that in the church world, as we've got these predefined roles for people to play, right? As a greeter, or as, an usher, or somebody that maybe leads a small group. And there's these kind of narrow channels for people to fit into in order to use those gifts. And certainly there are people that fit really well into those spots. And each one of those spots is valuable and important to the church overall. But Jesus and the Holy Spirit are so much more infinitely creative in the way that they use people and their gifts to go about making heaven on earth. And so what I love is when I see people that don't even, and I know you're talking about like the CEO that's just trying to fit into this spot somehow, but I've seen people, I know, and he'd be embarrassed if I mentioned, his name, so I won't mention his name, but people that know him will be able to figure this out. But I remember going on my first mission trip with him, and a pretty unassuming guy. He cleans pools for a living, and we went to New Mexico and we're serving the Navajo people on the Navajo reservation. I don't know that he said 4 words the entire trip, and this was a 6-day trip, and there was no internet or any of those kinds of things, so you had to engage with people. Well, that guy, here we are, 4 years later, not only is he going back to that trip every year, but he is leading that trip. And he is leading that, and you would have never expected for him to have the capacity to do that necessarily when I met him, at least on that first trip. He's given, he's given messages, he's baptizing people, he is, putting together and organizing this trip where there are 50 or 60 people going on, all the way from kids to adults. There's no facilities at this place, so he's having to organize, all the the water and the food and build a team around this. And it is amazing to me to see how that guy was leveraged by the Holy Spirit to do things that to me were just miraculous and supernatural.
Yeah.
And when you see that kind of stuff happening, you know people are living into the purposes for which they were redeemed and created. And that's a beautiful thing.
It's huge.
Yeah.
No.
Jason, I got two responses to that. And the first one is to church leaders. And then the second one is to just everyday people that participate in church. So start with the church leaders. I think volunteer roles, as Craig said, extremely valuable, but they need to be the starting blocks, not the finish line for individual races. Like we need to allow those to be places where people come and start to serve and explore their gifts, like kick the tires. Am I a hammer? Does this fit here? All these other questions. But we need to remove the inertia of the fact that that a lot of people treat these as the end zone. All you need to do is start serving here, and that's how you live the rest of your life. That he would have never seen the leadership at that Navajo thing. Andy Traub in the book Find Your Place would have never been given the permission or the freedom to accept what he saw was a personal calling of helping people that are just not able to speak up for themselves find gainful and meaningful employment. You have to read the I won't take the time here to unpack that story, but we need to stop acting like we know what's best for individuals and help people realize that there is a calling and train them how to be on board with the Spirit, to hear from the Spirit and obey the Spirit, so that his creativity unlocks their potential and the visions and the dreams that they have through the Spirit's leading. So that's like church leader, let's allow these things to be starting blocks, but not end zones. And the second thing is to normal everyday people. Don't allow your church to do that. Like leverage whatever influence that you have to help educate that you as people really are creative, that you are really able to be freed up and engaged, and I would assume that your loyalty to the church that does this type of equipping would go up, not down, as you see that the trajectory being expanded, perhaps. So I just think as the church as a whole is losing influence when it comes to at least our nation, the United States of America, that we're sitting in right now, we're watching church attendance and whatnot decline. I think it's going to continue to decline unless we start to see a mobilization of every follower of Jesus, which Jesus modeled for us when he was here on earth. And you can help us get there first by living out your masterpiece mission. Figure it out, take the next steps, and roll with it, and then try to bring everybody in your circle of influence along with that mentality.
I love that. What I'm hearing is a paradigm shift, because I think a lot of times, right, churches
and
are
a practice shift.
Right.
Yeah, don't just change your mind about it. Change the practice. Yes.
Because it's, you find out your top 2 to 3 spiritual gifts so you can get plugged in to an already existing ministry within your congregation. And this shift, with Find Your Place, with Masterpiece Mission, with giftpassionstory.com, really, for the church leaders, it helps us in that seat on the bus, in that vocation, equip the saints for the work of ministry to partner with Jesus throughout the week and saturate our neighborhoods with the gospel as we make this earth more like heaven. And so really, this paradigm and practice shift, really, it helps equip the church to be able to do what the church was designed to do.
Oh, and just one last thing. If church leaders are listening to this going, I don't think I can do that, let me just ask it from this angle. Are you tired of people complaining about the color of the carpet? Or whatever the complaints are, the fights are about? Well, remember what we said earlier? If you're not focused on the right things, you'll be focused on the wrong things. Like, start to equip people toward God's more. And then those things fade. Those are just little bitty things that won't matter anymore.
Yeah, the ministry environments kind of become that incubator, right, in the practice field where people get to, Craig, what you talked about, like trial and error, discovering, taking these little steps to really get clarity with that personal calling. Myra, I'd love to throw for you is what are some obstacles that maybe you have faced, or those that your discipling have faced when they're trying to get clarity with their personal calling, and maybe how did you or help them overcome those barriers? So in the book, we call them GPS jammers, is what Brian and Rob call them, but just things that kind of get in the way, whether it's fear, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the biggest jammers that I see is not so much. Well, maybe it's fear, but I think it's more of a sense of, oh, I could never do that.
Yeah.
It, it's not a false humility, but it's a not an understanding of what God would like to do through them. And so it just never really occurs to people to even try things. And so I think my role oftentimes is to just challenge them to see themselves as more. Sometimes that role is to, we talked about that God has more for all of us. And so people, I think, oftentimes don't realize that. And so to help people dream of what that more could be and how that could change other people's lives and see what that might mean. I think that helping people overcome those things takes a lot of ability to encourage, to ask the right questions, to help them see themselves the way God sees them. And so I think always, for one of the things that I want to do is to ask Jesus to give me his eyes to see this person, and then encourage them through that lens.
Yeah,
I'm Go ahead, Greg.
Jump in here too, because kind of like Myra, so I think one of the things that I see most often is the same thing, Myra, where people have an insecurity about what it is that they feel that perhaps they're called to do, and kind of going back to the tool analogies, sometimes it's because I think you've got like a screwdriver that's trying to drive nails, right? Mm-hmm. They're just not going to be effective, and so they can get frustrated. They're in the wrong role, they're doing the wrong stuff, and it's not fulfilling, and they're not good at it, and so that gets frustrating, and it gets old, and it gets discouraging. But often, if you're doing what it is that you've been created to do, then there is that fulfillment. There's that effectiveness that comes along with that. But also, it's important to remember that when we're talking about the tool analogy, a hammer is just a hammer unless somebody picks it up and uses it, right? Mm-hmm. And we have the master craftsman. We have Jesus who is using us to go about his work, and a master craftsman doesn't need the best tools in order to create a work of art, right? He can, that's one of the telltales of somebody who's a master at their craft, is that they can use, old tools to do incredible things, and so, I can be an old hammer sitting in a toolbox, and Jesus can pick me up and use me in wonderful ways. And what's also cool about that is that the craftsman will use a combination of tools in order to create his work, right? And so he uses us together in all those different ways in perfect combination. And we don't necessarily even have to know or have full knowledge of how those other things are being used and how he's growing and developing them. We just have to be obedient to what he's doing in and through us. And so I just kind of echo some of what you were saying, Myra.
Yeah. And I love what you bring out there with that old hammer thing. Because I'm thinking I've used some old hammers that my dad had that the head is loose on, right? But the master craftsman can repair that old hammer for the works that he wants to do. And so I think sometimes, too, it's a person who thinks, I'm too broken to be used. And we need to remember that our healer, that master craftsman, just takes that tool and says, this is still a good tool. It's got some use left in it. And takes it, fixes it, shims that little spot in the hammer so that it's not so wobbly anymore, and goes on about creating that masterpiece impact throughout the world.
Well, I love a good analogy, and I love it when somebody takes it to the new level. So thank you also for
Yes, you
that.
did. Rock on, Myron. That was beautiful.
You know, kind of feeling kind of like a segue into some of the more perhaps difficult parts of personal calling, unique design, this masterpiece mission. Do any of you have any stories of just like personal challenges or doubts in your journey with Jesus that, when it came to discovering your calling?
I'm happy to chime in here because my story is pretty much a repeated story of having to climb past barriers in my own head that other people didn't see for my life. I was in this church revitalization process. For 6 years, I was a part of a church that was trying to transition from traditional to purpose driven. And if people are familiar with that, it's like, that's not easy work. And I remember the former pastor was there. He was one of our elders, and he just kept saying, Brian, I need you to lead. You're trying to just build consensus. That's what was modeled for me. You just build consensus and try to move forward. And it was stagnant. And I recognize as I'm saying that out loud, there's totalitarianism, and then there's complete passivity. And he wasn't recommending either of those, but I tended to lead a lot more toward the passivity than take, appropriate leadership. And leadership was a word I did not see in myself at all. Like, I can remember reading a book on spiritual gifts that was written and taking the test, and it said you will never be a leader of any type of organization more than 120 people. So just be happy with your shepherding gifts that you have for the rest of your life. And that was the most wonderful news I ever heard. Let me resign to this. But the friends around me said, you are a natural leader. You have the capability. You're just scared to initiate because you believe you'll fail. And I really needed that insight. So I stepped into that and started to really pursue that. And obviously, years later, 20 something years after that, I have grown into that leadership role, and it's resulted in, well over 10,000 changed lives. Go God, right?
Yeah.
But that's only due to people seeing something in me that they called out and wouldn't let me hide behind. The second phase of that was more the apostolic word. I thought I knew what leaders were and thought I wasn't that. Well, they fixed that in me. And then we're in a leaders made one morning, and everybody's like, well, Brian, you got to go now. You got to share your gifts in this peer feedback part of the experience. And I gave them my gifts, and they said, no, apostolic is definitely one of your gifts. Well, I didn't see that at all either. And it scared me again. Like, I don't know how to think like that. And then it was, okay, I'll step into that, because I stepped into that leadership thing and it started to pay off. And then as I gradually started to understand that, it became more clear how I do operate that way. And that's what led to me having the courage to step out of a local context and start something as crazy as a brand new ministry called Disciples Made when I had 2 kids in college and one on their way to going to college and all these other things. It's just the apostolic bone in me would not allow me to go back into a setting similar to that. I had to do something like this. So high risk, high demand to overcome those hurdles. But oh my gosh, I was plagued with fear when I heard those things about me.
I think when we find out our spiritual gifts and go through that discovery process and learn more about it in ourselves, it's like we have God's stamp of approval, that helps us kind of overcome that fear. Well, it's like, I don't see this in me. Others are seeing it. But it's like, all right, we talk about obedience is greater than competence. And so we just kind of like, all right, Lord, I'm going to test this out. You're saying that I'm really gifted in leadership and apostleship, and what is going on here? And it's like, well, let's see what happens, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wow. Like,
those are the stories that phrase came out of. Those are 2 of the stories that phrase came out.
Yeah.
Thanks for catching
that. So as we kind of reflect on our stories, we've talked about moments of perhaps brokenness and blessing, and And so I kind of want to end today with just some practical advice. So kind of like our last words, based on our experience and stuff that, as we continue with this journey throughout the month of September of helping people take those steps to develop their personal calling, to take one step closer into their masterpiece mission. I'd love to ask each of you what is one piece of advice to people who are listening, who are at the very beginning of their journey, to help them find their personal calling? Any one of you want to go first? Myra?
I would say the thing that comes to mind first off is listen to the people around you. I mean, Brian talked about in his story how important that was. I know that I would not have stepped up to the places that I've stepped up to in ministry were it not for the people around me saying, yes, you can, or yes, you do have these gifts. And then permission giving is so important from church leaders. And so I would advise church leaders, give your people permission to try things and give them permission to fail, to find out what they're not good at, and trust that God can redeem those things. What if I hand this off to this person and they really mess it up, and then whatever happens? Well, we have a God who is a God of second chances and a God of redemption. Trust him if if this person feels like they can do it or being called to do it, and you're kind of on the line, err on the side of trust, trusting God first, and then trusting that he will work through this other person to make that happen. And again, for that person who's fearful to take that step, you've been given permission, but now it's like, really, I'm too afraid that I'll mess up. Trust God, trust him to do what he says he will do in you.
Love that. Thanks, Myra. Craig, what about you? One piece of advice.
Well, I'm going to cheat and I'm going to say two, but one of them is believe God, right? Just like Myra was saying, when we read Ephesians 2:10, he said, for we are God's masterpiece. He created us anew in Christ Jesus so we can do the good things that he planned for us long ago. We led with that, right? That's true. It's not just true for us that are here. It's not just true for church leaders or people that have gone to seminary. That's true for each and every one of God's people. His word is true. That is true. It's true about you, right? And so it starts with that, believe in God and keeping, that he's going to keep his word. The other thing is that, I spent a career in law enforcement, and one of the things that the best trainers did is they used the whole shift as an opportunity to train, whether or not they were on a call or they were running traffic or they were just driving from place to place. They did not waste an opportunity or a moment to not train. And I would say that as God's people, as followers of Jesus, every moment is a potential training moment, that we are in constant training. He is always teaching us if we are willing to watch and listen. And so kind of like we approach our scripture, right? I believe and I will. I think that we can approach not only God's scripture with that, God, I believe that you're teaching me something in your scripture, and I'm going to do this about it. I will do this. Same thing with life. God, what are you teaching me today? What are you revealing to me today about yourself, me, or others? And what do you want me to do about it? And I think that is part of that process, not only in discovering him, discovering us and how we relate to him, and discovering what it is that he has for us to do in this world.
Love it. Love it. Thanks, Craig. Brian, what about you? One thing.
Two quick ones. Sorry, if Craig did it, I'm going to do it. But one, you alluded to the idea of brokenness and blessing that are in the book. It's quite possible that your biggest impact might come in the area of personal brokenness that through God's help you've overcome and seen restoration from. So don't hide from that. There's a lot of people that are probably going through that brokenness right now that could use the kind of help and guidance that you have to offer from that. Second one is it's a whole lot easier to steer a car that's moving instead of a parked car. So if you're just going to wait around and hope that you get some guidance, that won't happen. Just start moving. Myra said this earlier, very, very helpfully. Just start moving. It's easier to steer a moving car than a parked one.
Well, everybody who is listening, thank you so much for joining us today. If you haven't already, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat if you're joining us on Riverside. And so we hope that what you take away from today is that it is worth it to trust and believe Jesus, that you have a masterpiece mission, that you were created on purpose for a purpose, and that it is a reality that that our life can be both fruitful and fulfilling, whether it's an easy season or a very difficult season. And so keep at it. We are here with you. You're not alone in this journey. And because character times calling equals impact, and it always equals fully alive. And so we do want to invite you that if you have not yet RSVP'd, Brian is hosting the Live Fully Alive course, which begins this Monday, September 9th. It's going to be at 7:30 p.m. Central Time, held on Zoom. And you can RSVP on the Fully Alive app by going to the events section. If you're not yet on the free Fully Alive community, you can go to gofullyalive.com, and where you can take your first steps in really unpacking what Jesus meant when he said, I came to give you life and life abundantly. And guess what? Personal calling plays a big part. And so thank you so much for for joining us today. And once again, we will be back next month for our October Fully Alive webinar. Thanks for joining us today. And Myra, Brian, and Craig, it's always a joy to be able to spend this time with you at the beginning of every month.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you, guys. All right.